Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Nathan Bell. I'm here in Paris, Texas, and you'll be witnessing a presentation today on the Red River Navigation Project. I want to take this opportunity to thank some of the people that are bringing this about today. One of those is Paul Allen with the Chamber of Commerce, Eddie Mayer, the Director of IT at Paris Junior College, who has put this together to a large extent, and of course Kim Wright and Randy Nation of the Civic Center that allowed us to use this facility. The speakers will be introduced individually, covering different portions of this project, and it is being recorded, so it will be available after the presentation. I can't say enough about the positive effects this project can have when it's completed. The effects it will have on 4 states, Oklahoma, Texas, Louisiana, and Arkansas, and other arid states that are close by. What it will have in the way of jobs and industrial development, businesses in southeast Oklahoma and northeast Texas. And I would ask that we in this territory do something that's not happening in the rest of the nation right now. And that is to come together to get this project done. Talk to all your elected officials, whether they be someone that's on a city council or if you've got contact with the President of the United States and everybody in between. This is a project that can only be built by us coming together and cooperating. And with that, I especially thank the people that are coming in that you'll be meeting individually, came into Paris to put this presentation on. This time, I'll turn the meeting over to John, who'll take it next.
Yes. My name is John Stone, and I'm the pro bono consultant for the past 15 years on this project, which means that my heart is in it, or else I wouldn't be doing it pro bono. We have achieved some progress so far, especially on the Arkansas reach. Every time you extend a river navigation project, it's called another reach instead of an extension. Arkansas is the second extension, or the second reach of the expansion of the Red River navigation system, which now goes from Shreveport, Louisiana on the Mississippi River to the port of Shreveport, Bossier City in Louisiana, northwest Louisiana, and has a few intervening river ports in between. Now, first I'm going to introduce Bill Blades, who was very instrumental in the development of the inland port between Richard Allen, San Diego, and Union Pacific Railroad, and to a lesser extent, Burlington Northern Railroad in Dallas. And he and Richard overcame many, many obstacles to get that done. Now, Richard Allen is continuing in the development of the inland port. Bill has also picked up and has done about $700 million worth of development as a consultant for Dallas and the school district, including elementary, middle, and high schools, and has done work from coast to coast for the Baptist Foundation, and with the late mayor of Fort Worth, Cliff Overcash, has developed 81 senior healthcare projects in 11 states. Bill is very interested in this because before he term limited out as a member of the Dallas City Council, he was in charge of economic development. And there he saw the detriments that were put in the way of Dallas-Fort Worth in emerging as an international trade leader. Currently, Dallas-Fort Worth is number 4 in the nation of import-export business. It is the only one in the top 5 in the nation without water access. Think what it would be with water access, particularly with a 19-county area that now encompasses approximately 10 million people, and more millions in the Northeast Texas area, and in Southeast Oklahoma, and in Arkansas. Arkansas has made tremendous progress in this. Now we're working on the third reach, or the third extension from Texarkana, Texas, at the index bridge of US 71 and 59 over the Red River into the Port of Dallas-Fort Worth on the Red River at Denison and the Indian Nations. This will be a significant leap forward because it will put DFW on the map as having water access to the sea lanes of the world, trading sea lanes of the world. So right now I'm going to introduce Bill Blades, but then later, after Bill finishes his part of the program, then I will introduce Rich Brontoli, who is a retired major from the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. And he is the director of the Red River Valley Association, has been the director of the Louisiana Red River Commission, the Arkansas Red River Commission, and is working quite closely with the Oklahoma Red River Commission and with the Red River Authority of Texas. Bill, take it away.
Thank you, John. Again, my name is Bill Blades. I am Dallas, Texas. John said part of the Dallas City Council was the chief of the economic development for the city of Dallas while there. Dallas, I'll speak a bit separately from Fort Worth, only because of the fact that they're truly two different entities. We're joined together and work as a combined group for the entire Metroplex area, 5-county Metroplex area. I got interested in this program through John, but it fell into line with what we were trying to do with the city of Dallas's transportation assets. The inland port was designed to work in conjunction with the Port of Houston, where the port was getting to a point where it was full and they needed to move things off of their those wharfs in order to be able to take in more of the ships in a faster turn. Kind of like a restaurant. More times you turn your tables, the best progress you make. Putting it pretty simple. In doing that, we chose a place that was on the south side of Dallas, at the intersection of Interstate 635 and Interstate 45. Two rail opportunities into the industrial area, and they have developed now about half of what the inland port can be. The truck traffic in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, as most of you in any metropolitan surrounding, has gotten unbelievably dense. And when you look at the cost of shipping from an international port, water is by far the less expensive. With the widening of the Suez Canal, that makes the ports along the Gulf Coast even more viable than they've ever been in their existence. What we're talking about here today is the widening of the Red River to accept barge traffic from Shreveport, Louisiana to Denison, Texas. And all of the communities that go along in that stretch are looking at the possibility of a port being in their local areas. The Dallas-Fort Worth area is very interested in it because we're the 9th largest city, Dallas, in the nation. and the only one of the 9 that has no water capability. When you look at where the port would be in Denison, Texas, it also is capable of bringing great industrial progress to southern Oklahoma and the Indian nations. Includes hydroelectric power, less dollars in transportation, less trucking on the major freeways and highways and the interstates in the Oklahoma, Texas, Arkansas, Louisiana area. Mr. Brontoli, who you will hear from here in just a moment, being a member of the Corps of Engineers and director of the Red River Valley Association, is going to make a presentation to you that gives out many details that you might have, at least being able to tell you what he's got, where we're trying to go with it, and be able to answer your questions over a time period where you send in your questions over the internet. So I'm going to turn this over to Rich and let him make his presentation. I hope you find it interesting in every way we can make it interesting. Thank you very much for being with us.
Okay, well, thank you very much. I do want to mention that Bill and John have been instrumental in making this get us where we're at, especially this reach. They've been bulldogs in getting legislation through Texas to make the Red River Authority a local sponsor so that this can happen, and we'll get into that. Red River Valley Association is a nonprofit member-supported organization. We do water resource projects in the 4 states, everything from navigation, flood control, water supply, water quality. So we basically are consultants on how to get through the federal system. If you want a federal project, we'll help you get through the system, authorization, and funding. So what I want to do as far as navigation, the first thing I want to do is explain to you what's been successful in Louisiana, because this is what you're going to see when we do navigation past Shreveport, Bossier. The main benefits we've realized is transportation savings, water supply, irrigation, recreation, ecosystem, hydropower. And I'll say right now, all 5 locking dams on the Red River, a company has a FERC license to put hydropower in each of those dams, and that is our intent on all future lock-in dams, is to have hydropower. And then we'll talk about non-traditional navigation benefits. But here's the real reason that you want to have navigation. If you see the black line, you see there's a red line, and that red line starts at Shreveport and goes to Denison Dam. But you can see Shreveport, Bossier, you could put a barge, you could put a product on a barge and go anywhere that there's a black line. You can go to the Great Lakes, you can go to the Gulf, you can go to Pittsburgh, and you can get product and raw material from all those locations. So the key to having inland navigation is your access to basically half the country. And the red line is what we're going to talk about, what we're looking at in trying to develop navigation past Shreveport, Bossier. So here's the main features of a navigation project. You have your lock-in dam, which basically creates a pool so you can maintain 9-foot navigation. Most of you know, even the Red River up here during the summer drought, you can walk across the Red. At Shreveport, you could have walked across the Red before Lock-in Dam 5 was completed. So it gives you that year-round 9-foot channel. Now you have channel realignments. Some channels are the bendways are too strong for the toes to actually get around, so they'll do a cutoff. And they cut off the oxbow and straighten the river. We'll talk about what we do with those when they do that. you have dikes and revetments and you have bank stabilization. You have to maintain the channel so that the river's not constantly moving and you're constantly trying to keep a navigation channel. The dikes, which stick out into the river, keep the flow of the river in your channel and self-scours. It keeps the silt moving down. And we've had great success in Louisiana, where there's very little dredging between the lock and dams because the dikes keep the silt moving and keep you 9 foot or greater. Most of the river in Shreveport's 12 foot naturally with those dikes. Bank stabilization, I think landowners would be excited about that along the river. So would everybody in Louisiana, because we get everybody silt, and that's what they're dredging from Arkansas, Texas, and Oklahoma. So that's a great benefit, but you have to do that to maintain the channel so the river doesn't eat away and create a new channel. Okay, here's the lock and dam. It's basically a water elevator. All you're doing is you look at the little cartoon of the tow coming in. The tow comes in, in this case, he's going upstream. There's no pumping. It's all by gravity. He comes into the lock, the gate closes behind him. They open a gate, and by gravity, the water comes in and just fills it up. Naturally, by gravity, the tow comes up. They open the upstream gate, and he comes out. The concept works the same. He comes back. They close the gate behind him. He's in the bathtub. They open up a gate by an electric motor at the bottom. Underneath in the wall, the water goes out downstream, and the boat goes down, and out he goes. So really, it's a simple concept, but you also have to have the dam part. And that's what you see to the left of the picture is the dam. And they're constantly adjusting those gates to maintain a pool, a constant pool. Now, when we get a lot of rain, we do get a lot of flooding, those gates they'll open them to try to keep the pool. But at some point, they'll open those gates all the way and the river will flow naturally. We call it open river. And the amount of water going through that section of the dam is the same equivalent as if the lock and dam wasn't there. So we're not flooding people upstream like there's a misconception that the dam is flooding everybody upstream. They're not, because they're allowing the river to flow past it. But that's what you need is the lock system and the dam to maintain your pool. Typically, between lock and dams is about 30 miles, but also the lift is 25 to 30 feet is a typical lift of the lock and dam on the river. So we talk about what's the benefit of having barge traffic. Well, obviously, when you look at cargo, the capacity, here's an example of what one barge can do compared to rail and truck. So you can see one barge on the left is dry cargo, and on the right is your liquid. One barge holds the equivalent of 70 tractor-trailer trucks for 16 trains. Well, on the Red River, we have 6 barge tows. One tow pushes 6 barges, which is the equivalent to a unit train, basically 100 cars. And on the right, you can see a tanker barge holds a lot more than a tractor-trailer truck, and that takes a lot of trucks off the interstate. We talk about fuel efficiency. This shows you the ton miles per gallon. Again, the barge can push a ton of product a lot further than any other commodity per gallon. And then we talk about air emission. Everybody's concerned about carbon dioxide again, because you have one barge towing, pushing barges, 6 barges on our river. On the Mississippi, you're talking up to 25 to 30 barges at a time. You have a great efficiency in reducing the carbon dioxide into the air per ton of cargo moved. Economic impact. On the left is jobs, and you can see when they started constructing Lock and Dam 1 on the Red River. And you can see the jobs went up, obviously, as they were constructing them. 1995, we completed Lock and Dam 5, and you can see the jobs went down. Well, then you see the red line going up again. And that's because this is a civil works project. This was a $2 billion project for the 5 lock and dams and all the dikes and revetments. Well, if the communities don't take advantage of these projects, then yes, it's a boondoggle, it's a waste of money. But I'm proud to say that in Louisiana, we all got together and said, we're not going to let this just sit here. There's 5 public ports. There's 4 private terminals. There's a power plant just north of Alexandria that gets 100% of their fuel by barge, 2.5 million tons a year of coal and petcoke. So it's up to the communities once you have a project that it's developed. The government's not going to do it. They may come in and put in the infrastructure, but it's up to the communities to develop it. And if you look at the right, again, it's the dollars. Again, a great amount of dollar influx into the communities during construction. And then it took some time to get the ports going and get everything going. But once they did in Louisiana, we now realize the benefits to the waterway. Type of cargoes, again, we're looking at bulk, basically coal, petcoke, limestone, sand and gravel for construction, fertilizer, steel, manufactured items, timber, petroleum, raw materials. And we say manufactured items. The Port of Catawba has a roll-on, roll-off. And what that is there used to be Beard Industries in Shreveport, Bossier. They made huge tanks for like oil fields, pressurized tanks that couldn't go by road or rail. They brought them to the port, put it on a barge, and went to where they needed to. So you have the ability for manufacturing of large items that can't go by rail or truck, but can go by water. I do want to point out that waterborne is the only competition for long-haul rail. An example is that if you've ever been to Shreveport, Bossier, and you cross the I-220 bridge going into Bossier on the left, you'll see a huge sand and gravel operation for all the construction basic of the area. It's huge. 100% of that comes in by train. And the reason is in 1995, when Lock and Dam 5 was completed, rail rates came down drastically to beat water. Now you can say, well, there's no barges on the river, you're not running, but we're getting the value of the waterway by reduced rail rates because of the competition. We continue to remind our industries you can always use water as a leverage when you're negotiating with the rail or truck. Another example is when we were doing the benefits in Arkansas, we went to Cooper Tire, and they get this nasty black stuff to make tires. So we went to their supplier and said, where are you getting all this stuff? And he says, oh, we get it by truck. And we said, where do you get it from? The Port of New Orleans. Are you kidding me? All their stuff comes in by truck on I-49, and it could all come right from the Port of New Orleans on barge to Texarkana. Container on barge, we'll talk about that a little later. And we do need truck and rail because a port, once you get the product there, has to get somewhere. So you need truck and you need rail to get your product to the final destination or get it to the port. So we have to think intermodal. Again, another example I'll tell you is Nucor is a huge national steel company. They have a manufacturing facility just west of Lufkin, Texas, Volcraft. They're getting all their steel coil, and we're talking about steel coil, 1 coil per truck, from Houston. Well, their trucks are going there and sitting 10 hours, 12 hours, and they tried it by rail, and rail prices were high. They came over, Shreveport, Bossier talked to them. They're now bringing 100% of their steel from one of their factoring factories on the Mississippi River, down the Mississippi, up the Red River to Shreveport, and putting it on a truck. Their trucks have no wait time. They pull in, a coil's put on it, they're gone. They're gone to Volcraft. They've dedicated 10 trucks to do 2 trips a day, and they tell us they're saving a lot of money. So it's pretty amazing how far out you can go and what kind of products because we never thought that would happen. So there's a lot that can happen once you get waterborne transportation. Think outside the box. Irrigation and water supply. Bossier gets 100% of their water from the Red River. What's important here is their intake is above the city of Bossier. And back, we had a drought not 10 years ago. If we did not have the pool effect, the lock and dam holding the river high, their intakes would have been out of the river. The river would have been that low. So the pool effect of the lock and dam gives you a reliable supply of water year round. And again, irrigation. NRCS, Department of Agriculture, worked with North Caddo Parish. They put a pump in the Red River. They pump water out of the Red River into the bayou. And then the farmers put laterals into the bayou, and they irrigate their fields. Again, you've got to have a reliable source of water, and that works. So there's a lot of irrigation and water supply is important. Recreation. Again, I think most of you know around here, it's pretty dangerous to get into the Red River at any time. You don't know where the channel is. You can get into trouble. Once you create a stable pool, you can have unbelievable recreation. The Red River Waterway Commission, which is the Louisiana Commission for the Red River, has created 20 recreation sites on the Red River. You can see they get 2.8 million visitors a year. It became a great bass fishery because of the pool and those oxbows I told you about. They keep one end open so that fish can spawn in there and fishermen get in there. We've had 2 Bassmaster Classics at Shreveport, Bossier, and 1 FLW championship. The only reason Bassmaster hasn't come back is because the convention center in Shreveport's not big enough for their outdoor show, which is more important to them, really. That's their moneymaker than the fishing, although they love the fishing and would like to come back to the Red, so they're working on that. The other thing is, if you've been to Bossier City, Bass Pro Shops there, and that's the anchor to that shopping area. The only reason Bass Pro Shops there is because the Red River became a bass fishery, and we had all these tournaments, and everybody started fishing there. If we didn't have the reliable fishing and the pools and the fishery, I seriously doubt Bass Pro Shop would have come to Bossier City. Ecosystem, again, I'm showing you in the top left, those oxbows or those bendways that we cut off and straighten the river a little bit. We have it in law where the Corps dams the upstream side of the oxbow. They have to dredge the downstream side and keep it open. They can't let it silt in and become a lake because we want that area to be slack water for fish to spawn and for recreation. And so that's been mandated. The other thing is we had a group of folks that were conservationists, environmentalists in Shreveport, Bossier area, and they wanted to create a wildlife refuge. We got together, they got together with a lot of economic development folks, carved out economic development areas like the ports, interstates, anywhere that we thought economic development would happen, and said the rest of that area could be created into a wildlife refuge, and they did. We actually have, U.S. Fish and Wildlife has a refuge welcome center in Bossier City on an oxbow, and the Nature Conservancy has bought lands up and down the Red River up to the Arkansas border and has created a national wildlife refuge. Any project that we come north and new navigation, we are going to, it's to our value to look at the ecosystem and create wildlife refuges, habitat areas, and to make it, because that only increases the hunting and fishing ability, and it's the right thing to do for conservation. So now we're going to talk about the next reach, which is Southwest Arkansas. As you can see here, we're looking at 3 locking dams. One is just north of Shreveport, near Benton. Really not sure exactly where that would be. The next one would be north, just above where the Sulphur River comes in. And then the next one up above Garland to kick it all the way to the Index Bridge. That's what we're looking at. Some of the challenges. The first locking dam is in Louisiana and 2 are in Arkansas, so you're involving 2 states. The question is there going to be a federal or public-private funding source? How are you going to do it? So the Corps of Engineer feasibility study is a 50-50. It's a $3 million 50-50 cost share. We've been for over 10 years trying to get with the Corps has never come up with a benefit cost greater than 1.0. You have to have a benefit greater than 1.0. Your benefits have to equal or exceed your cost of the project. And that's just on commercial navigation. Once you're above 1.0, you can start adding recreation, water supply, hydropower, and all those. But it has to be above 1.0 on commerce first. Well, after messing around, the state of Arkansas gave the Arkansas Red River Commission, who's the local sponsor for that stretch of the river, $1 million and said, okay, we're giving you $1 million. You have one more chance to see if there's benefits greater than 1.0. If there is, great. If not, that's it. We're not going to look at it anymore. So I'm basically the administrator for the Arkansas Red River Commission. We went to the Corps and said, we're going to give you $1 million. It was 100% state money, contributed funds. But we want you to hire a contractor that does this. Because, the Corps is a wonderful organization, but they don't have the ability to really get out and beat the bushes. They mail out surveys to companies. If they answer, they answer. So we said, we want you to hire a company. So they hired a company, GEC out of Baton Rouge, who does this. We spent over 2 years with them. We worked with them, the Arkansas Commission and we beat the bushes. Like I said, we went to all these companies, knocked on their doors, the chicken feed and all these folks. And when we were done, the Corps announced that they did the analysis. They got all the data that for 2 locking dams, it was a 1.8 benefit cost ratio. For 3 locking dams, it's 1.2. So they agreed to resume and complete a feasibility study. Well, now how are you going to do that? We're going to cost share that with the government. You got to wait for the government to get their $1.5 million. With the no earmarks, Congress has no earmarks. They can't really impact. It's up to the administration to allocate the funding. We don't believe we'd ever get federal funds. So we're going to do what's called a Section 203. It's a 3-year study. And what we do is we can hire our own company. We do the study. We give the Corps some money to do technical assistance. They'll make sure we follow all the right procedures, do all the right studies. And when we're done with our feasibility study, it will actually be an authorized federal project signed by the Assistant Secretary of the Army for Civil Works. And we would have the ability to have a federal project. So we got together with Arkansas and we said, really Locking Dam 6 is in Louisiana and they get a great benefit from Shreveport all the way to Arkansas. They'll get recreation, they'll get water supply and a lot of things. So I met with a lot of folks in the levee districts, the cities, the parishes, and the Red River Waterway Commission, and they all agreed a different percent for each of them to come up with $1.5 million if the state of Arkansas came up with $1.5 million. So right now we are waiting the state of Arkansas legislators just finished their session, and we're waiting to hear in the next week or so that they come up with the $1.5 billion. If they do, we'll then initiate that feasibility study this year. And Louisiana, I've already talked to our partners there. They've said no problem. They'll come up with the money in the next calendar year. So what we're going to do is create a committee of Arkansas and Louisiana folks to, number one, select the contractor, and two, to monitor and assist in the study. This way, everybody has a say in what happens during the study and that. So that's where we are there with the Arkansas stretch, and we're hoping the governor makes a good announcement the next week or so, and we can get started on that feasibility study. Okay, the next stretch is Texarkana to Denison Dam. And I'll just tell you, I started in 1993 with the association, and Arkansas was like, yeah, maybe, but this stretch was a joke. You know, you got to be kidding me. So as we've talked and was mentioned earlier, that, yeah, the Trinity River would have been the ideal navigation channel because it goes right to Houston, but that's not possible. So why is not the red possible? The Metroplex is located geographically in a perfect location. Great for distribution center, it pretty much is now. And it can be loaded from any seaport in the world. You can, again, like we said, you can bring in commodity anywhere. You can, of course, you'd have to use the port of Baton Rouge, basically, and Baton Rouge and New Orleans. But that's not a problem. And again, you have global reach. But this is what would make it totally possible. This is what we're really going to concentrate on, is container on barge. It is happening in different parts of the country. It's not widely accepted yet, container on barge. It's being demonstrated in different stretches of the Mississippi and some other smaller rivers. And I just read last week in one of the waterway journals that a company has actually created a barge specifically for containers. This is just a regular hopper barge that you might put corn or rock in, and they've just been putting containers in those. But a company has actually developed a barge dedicated to containers. And I really believe that's going to be the future of the waterway, and that, I think, is what's going to make our stretch doable. Again, same commodities, equipment and machinery could be a big thing for this region. Oversized products, container on barge will be huge. It's important to have inbound and outbound cargoes. We have a lot of inbound cargoes on the Red River. We don't have that much outbound. Now we do have Genesis in Shreveport, Bossier, does send oil products, petroleum products out. Their barges come up empty. They load them at Caddo, Bossier, and they go out and get loaded on ships in New Orleans. So we do have some outbound cargo. And again, you get domestic and foreign destinations. The pools do give us some water ability to hold water, just like we're doing in Louisiana. Again, the benefits, just to reiterate, you've got your regional and global trade. You've got ports and terminals, and I want to emphasize public and private. You don't have to have just public ports, which people seem to think about, but you can have a private terminal. There's a lot of rock in South Oklahoma. We've visited with them somewhat. they really weren't too close to Texarkana. But they can have a private terminal on the Red River, ship their rock anywhere they want. To really expand their ability to market their rock, sand and gravel. So, we emphasize there could be a lot of private terminals. You got the excellent transportation network like was described. Again, we know our highways are really getting jammed, and it would really reduce air emissions, wear and tear on the interstates, accidents. Other benefits, again, we talked about recreation. You can have recreation any small town, anybody on the river could put in boat launches and parks and recreation areas that right along the river. The riverbanks, all the riverbanks and channels would be stabilized. Hydropower will be big and we'll have some flood control. The lock and dams on the Red River do not have flood control value. We are going to look at that as we go further north with more lock and dams to try to build in flood control. Obviously, that will increase the cost of the lock and dam because you're going to have a different structure to handle that. But that's an evaluation we think we should do. So the current status is the Tulsa Engineer District is responsible for the Red River between Texarkana and Denison Dam. When we said, at first, we said, we need to determine whether it's even physically possible to have navigation on that stretch. So that's really where John and Bill got the money from the North Central Texas COG, was to evaluate the physical aspect of it. So we said, okay, they agreed to give $500,000 to do a engineering analysis. Well, we go to Tulsa District, and the first thing they say is, well, there's a 1989 study that says, yes, it's physically possible, but the economic benefits weren't great at all. As a matter of fact, they were like, in 1989, 1.2. Well, I'll tell you, in 1995, 2000, when we started with Arkansas, the Arkansas stretch was 1.2, and now we're 1.8. Things change over time, and like I said, Tulsa, I'm sure, didn't get out and really talk to companies. So this engineering study turned into an economic evaluation. So the Red River, they did get legislation to make the Red River Authority of Texas, which is the whole length of the Red River in North Texas, the local sponsor for such a study. So North Central Texas COG committed $500,000, and the Corps said, okay, we can do what's called planning assistance to states, and we can do an economic evaluation, 50-50. But we got, Red River Authority had their 50, and it's less than 5. It's like $400,000, $200,000 each. And so we were waiting, and about 2 months ago, the Tulsa district said the study was approved by headquarters of the administration, and it's been funded. So we think they actually got the money, hopefully this next couple of weeks. They're getting the money transferred from Red River Authority of Texas, and we'll be able to start that economic evaluation in a couple of months. We actually developed a scope of work, and we're just ready to get the study started. So the challenge is that the Red River is the border between Texas and Oklahoma. So you don't have a clear owner of the Red River. So what my board has agreed is, and I have created a committee in Texas. It's going to be TxDOT and Red River Authority of Texas, the two members. We haven't heard from TxDOT. We've talked to them a lot. Hopefully they're going to agree, since they got navigation experience along the coast. Oklahoma, with the Oklahoma Water Resource Board, and they're excited to be a member. And Oklahoma Department of Transportation, they're excited to be a member. And then the two Indian nations, Chickasaw and Choctaw, they're members of my association already. So we've created this committee, and we are going to monitor and assist the Corps in this economic evaluation. We're going to come to folks like you, to come out to all the communities and all the COGs and all the chambers and say, let's talk about all the potential businesses or all the businesses that exist. That's another point I have to bring up. The only benefits that can be considered are existing companies. You can't say because we have water, we can have this kind of a company. It's got to be one that's existing. And what they do is they say, okay, say I'm a company that says I can use the water. Okay, I can use 1 million tons a year. So what they do is they say, okay, how much do you pay now per ton to your final destination? Well, I spend $10 a ton. They do an evaluation and they actually send it off to, there's some certain universities that do rate analysis. They'll come up and say, well, if you have water and barges, you can move it for $8 a ton. So the benefit is $2 a ton, and there's $2 million of benefits. My $1 million times, my million tons times $2 in savings. So that's how they come up with commercial benefits. So that's what we're going to have to do from Texarkana to Denison Dam, is look at all the companies that have the ability to use waterborne transportation. So the full feasibility study after the economic, and it comes out over 1.0, what do you do next? You go to a full feasibility study. It's a 3-year, $3 million study, just like we're doing in Arkansas. Do we think the government will ever come up with the money to do that? I personally don't think so without earmarks, because they can't maintain the systems they have. They can't maintain the infrastructure the government has now. They're not going to want to build more that they can't maintain. So again, I believe we're going to have to do a 203. And when we come up with a positive benefit cost ratio, say, look, the benefits exceed the cost just in commerce. Now you add recreation, hydropower, and all the others. I think we'll find the two states, the Indian nation, I think we'll find a lot of folks interested in participating in a full feasibility study. And then once you do the feasibility study, how do you actually construct it? We're going to have to be working on that. Again, at 203, we'll have a federal project. Now, at that point, will the climate change that the federals will build billion-dollar lock and dam systems? Probably not. So then you have to decide, are you going to do federal, you're going to do a public-private venture? What I think could be possible is right now, the inland waterway system, the tow companies pay 20 cents a gallon to the federal government into an inland waterway trust fund. That fund is used for major rehabs and new construction. So if we constructed lock and dams past Shreveport, 50% would come out of that inland waterway trust fund and half come out of the federal general fund. But I would think once you pass Shreveport-Bossier, tow companies could pay that fuel tax to some sort of an authority and have like maybe a toll waterway. And you can have hydropower as a source of income to operate and operate and maintain the system. So there's going to have to be a lot of options that we look at on how we actually build, finance, and build it. But public-private venture may be the way we have to look at it. I think that's it. I will say I would, anybody that's online or anybody, I would be glad to make a presentation to any groups along the way, maybe get a number of groups together and we do a virtual meeting with folks, different organizations. But I think it's important to get everybody educated on what's possible, where we're at. And I think with that, I can open it up for questions. Anybody in the room? Yes.
Michael Morris, who is head of the Regional Transportation Commission for North Central Texas Council of Government, has projected that he thinks that it's inevitable that will be a public-private partnership to do the extension first in Arkansas, second reach extension, and then the third reach extension from Texarkana to Denison. How do you see something like that taking shape? Who would the players be? Would you get debt financing on it through revenue bonds, through some underwriter like Stevens Inc. out of Little Rock, or some other bond underwriting firm? How would you see that? I mean, we have so many needs that have been postponed in the inland waterway system for the Northeast and for the Midwest, that it looks to me objectively like the only way that can be done is a public-private partnership. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think another option where we'd look at is if we look at all 4 states, because if eventually, Arkansas, Louisiana, above Shreveport, if the 4 states agreed or came to terms, we can create an authority like the TVA and have a 4-state authority. And that organization, it wouldn't have to be a federally mandated authority. We could see how that works, but they would have the ability for bonding and getting sources. And I think one of the things we want out of the feasibility study in Arkansas is to come up with an ROI, a rate of return on investment, so that we could go out and show private investors that there is the ability to, that it is worth investing in. So in concurrent with the 3-year study in Arkansas, we are going to have to really look at all that, because we don't want to come at the end of 3 years, have a great feasibility study, and then say, now what do we do? We want to have everything in place so that at the end of 3 years, we're ready to move into final design and construction. So all that's going to have to be looked at concurrently.
Well, in essence, the second reach through Arkansas, the third reach through Oklahoma and Texas would become a water toll road. Is
That's if we created an authority. That is exactly once you pass Shreveport, you'd have your own mechanism for collecting some sort of a user fee. And there's a lot of ways to do that: by tons, by fuel, by blockage. We would have to decide how we'd want to do that.
And because it's a toll road and you have anticipated shipping on it through your economic studies, then that means that you set the stage for feasibility proof with bond underwriters for revenue bonds for the debt portion of the capital stack necessary to finance it.
Right.
Is that one of the ways that you see happening?
Yeah, I mean, I'll tell you, the 5 lock and dam system in Louisiana from the Mississippi all the way to Shreveport Bossier, the Corps of Engineers needs about $12.5 million a year to dredge, operate and maintain 5 locking dams, and do all the necessary things they do. So that's for 5 locking dams. So you look at 3 locking dams, it's not really a great deal. I mean, it's not that much money when a lot of people today are talking in the trillions of dollars. We're talking $10, $15 million to operate and maintain a navigation system each year. I mean, that's all we need to calculate all that, and we're going to start looking at that. now. So,
Would you see maybe 8 to 11 lock and dam systems being necessary to go from Texarkana to the Port of Dallas, Fort Worth, and Denison, and the Indian Nations?
yeah, I think Tulsa mentioned 8 to 10 maybe. Conditions may have changed since that study, but they were talking probably 8 to 10.
And that's based upon a new lock and dam being necessary for every 25 to 30 feet increased elevation.
Right. What they would do is you put a lock and dam in, raises, you'd say about 30 feet, and then you go out, and where you lose 9 foot, that's where you got to put your next lock and dam. So a lot depends on how the water gets, it may spread out near the lock and dam, but depends on the topography, how far that can go.
Richard, the last time I was briefed several years ago now, the Red River is actually owned by Oklahoma. They own to the south boundary line vegetation of the Red River. And that now the water is what I think is important. My understanding is that that water is owned by the state of Texas and the state of Oklahoma until it crosses through the Denison Dam, at which time, again, by agreement among the 4 states, 25% Oklahoma, 25% Texas, 25% Louisiana, and 25% Arkansas. So you've got the water itself as one owner, the ground underneath it will be primarily Oklahoma, from what I understand. And that treaty was just signed just a matter of a few years ago.
Yeah, and we got to look into that because it's the state boundary that was determined to be the vegetated line on the Texas. It is a federal waterway. It is not, so it is a federal waterway, navigable waterway. So we'd have to look at, again, on the actual ownerships. And that's why we're not going to do anything without the 2 states together and the entities working together. And there is the Red River Compact, because people say, oh, all you're going to do is dam up the water in Texas, Oklahoma, and Arkansas and Louisiana is going to go dry. Well, that won't happen because the Red River Compact, which is a federal compact that meets each year, demands and that so much water crosses into Arkansas, so much crosses into Louisiana. And all that's going to have to be calculated in the engineering of the lock and dams, because that is by law that so much water has to pass those states. So the compact will ensure that the water quantity is met by each state.
I was also very impressed with the ancillary benefits that came along with both the wildlife refuge and the other benefits of reduced flooding, better control over it, stabilization along the shore. I know in the real estate business, there are a number of ranches that some have gained and some have lost, depending on the bend in the river changing. And people have acquired land, and then in other cases, somebody right downstream may have lost hundreds and hundreds of acres. And that stabilization, I think, will be important to people on both sides of the river.
Absolutely, that'd be a great benefit. There's a lot of secondary benefits to a navigation project. The recreation value alone, the income to small towns along the river, fishing tournaments and things that they could do is could be big for small towns that are looking for economic development opportunities.
That would be a lake at each lock. You did mention some lakes.
The locks create a lake effect behind. It's called a pool, and it's basically a lake effect because you're not letting the river get below a certain elevation. The dams will close shut and keep the river at a certain elevation, so you maintain that 9 foot for the margin. But they also have a part of the dam where they have to constantly let water go over to aerate the water below them for the wildlife and fish, so that you don't want to starve oxygen from the pool below you. So there is provisions to keep the water oxygenated below the locking dams.
Could you please explain to us how the hydroelectric power is generated by the opening and closing of locks?
Yeah, it's actually the ones on the Red River in Louisiana. What they do is divert water around the dam part. Now, I said so much water has to go over to aerate. Well, they would take that water, put it through turbines, and that's how they would aerate the water below. So they would have a constant flow. Of course, hydropower is an instant on, instant off. And so, however, that would be another thing. How do you market the hydropower? We've talked to some hydropower people already. You can do things like identify, you're going to create so much kilowatts. And you might find one industry that buys it all from you, or you may put it into the grid. You may do whatever's going to be most economically beneficial, because that's going to be, we're going to want to keep that money to operate and maintain the system. So, yeah, the hydropower could be a really big factor in income.
Seems to me that with the addition to the benefit of the reduced bad gases and things that we're talking about, reduction that way, and the creation of the areas for wildlife and what have you, stabilization, all of that kind of comes back to what seems to be a major theme today in Washington anyway about climate change, and doing everything we can. Seems it would be very, very popular idea to pick up on this with the extra benefits. So.
Well, now, some people will say you are changing the dynamics of the river from a riverine to a lake effect. Then I remind people, there used to be something called the Great Raft. All the Great Raft did is make a big pool of the Red River. And that's why you were able to have steamboats come up to Texarkana, and they even found one on the Oklahoma-Texas border. But so in our case, we're different than most other rivers. We had a dam effect with the Great Raft. So I might argue we're actually putting it back to its natural state. But you are going to get folks that are going to say you're changing a riverine system to a pool system, to a lake system. And that's just something, that's part of the feasibility study, is an environmental impact statement. There's going to have to be some in-depth analysis of the change to the environment, a lot of public meetings. It's all going to have to be reviewed by federal agencies. So there's going to be a lot to the process of the feasibility study.
You could probably say we're not starting tomorrow.
We're not starting construction tomorrow. We're going to start a feasibility study in Arkansas in the next month, but not construction. Now, even if you tried to do it on your own, you'd have to get Corps permits. And basically the Corps would say, you got to do a feasibility study, EIS, you got to do all these things. So my contention to Arkansas was, you may be funding it all on your own, but when you're done and the Corps has approved it and signed, you take that and say, I want to build this. Now have them say, no, you can't. You just approved it. You would have built it as a federal agency. So I think what we would have at the end of the feasibility study is we would have a project that could be started immediately because it's been approved by the federal government. All the permits, all the environmental impact statements, everything would have been approved. So that's the value of the 203. Because if you do it yourself, anything you do yourself and then give it to the Corps or the government, they're going to say, well, you did it yourself, the engineer
Self-service.
did it, you paid him, so he gave you the answer you wanted. We've heard that before. So do it again. So this way, we want the Corps monitoring everything we do. So at the end of it, we met all the federal requirements.
Would there be any project in the works or foreseeable that would benefit wildlife in this river corridor as much as this?
I'm not aware of any.
I mean, nobody has proposed that. I mean,
We're pretty well the last navigable river that can be made navigable in the country. There's probably not any others that could be made navigable. I mean, the Illinois, the Ohio, everything else has been made navigable. We're the last. These are the last two stretches that's possible.
so in other words, we're the only game that is available to do that, to have all these economic benefits, to stabilize the natural resources, bank stabilization, drainage regulation of the flow of the water, hydroelectric power, and wildlife refuges, and recreation possibilities, all in one package.
Oh, yeah.
There just isn't any other available area for that.
Like in Arkansas, we're going to take the 3 lock and dam option 1.2 benefit cost ratio, but now we're going to start adding, feasibility study adds everything else into it. Recreation, hydropower, water supply, everything else gets added to that 1.2. So we should be well over 2.0, and that's what you use for your rate of return or to show people the economic value of the project. So.
With the population differential of the Dallas-Fort Worth area in 19 counties, as the mayor of Fort Worth pointed out, at the TAR convention in September, what was it, 2018? We're approaching 10 million people, 19 counties, which is the true economic influence area of the Dallas-Fort Worth area and the Oklahoma areas. Wouldn't it be shocking or surprising if the economic benefit multiples over cost weren't terrifically higher than on Arkansas and even some of the Louisiana areas, because the population is more than all 3 counties deep on either side of the river all the way to New Orleans?
Yeah, again, I think, and this is what we've got to really get into is the industry around Dallas-Fort Worth. If it's high tech, it doesn't lead to bulk commodities and manufacturing. So we got to reach out to the manufacturing, and I think there's a lot of quarries along the Red River in Oklahoma at least, but so we got to be careful when we think about the population. We got to really look at what kind of industry is there. And that's what we're going to really get into is what's the industries along the river that can move on the waterway. So, but again, if you're making cars, you may not put cars on the barges, but you might got to bring in the raw material. So I mean, that's why we really got to look. Like we went and talked to Pilgrim's Pride and them in Arkansas, because we were told by the local people, oh, everybody around here grows corn and that goes to the chickens. So we go talk to the Pilgrim's Pride. Well, that's only about 20%. We get 80% shipped in. Oh, really? How does it come in? By rail from the Midwest? Well, the Midwest could put it on a barge and bring it around. And they're all familiar with barge traffic, so they were a great added benefit because if they had barge traffic. But you got to go out to the companies, and a lot of companies you'll get nothing, but it's amazing. Every once in a while, the ones you get, you go, oh yeah, like the Cooper Tire ones. Who would have thought they trucked 100% of their black tar from the Port of New Orleans?
Going back in just the time I spent in the military, I was very much impressed with the map about us if you take something from the Dallas Fort Worth, put it on the Denison Port, and you go up into so many places in the upper East Coast even, and taking things like this would help improve. Waterways are harder to destroy and will stand up better in a defense of a country than trains can, or even trucks. And trucks can't. So it adds to our ability to defend our nation itself. The more we had, and not just this one, but any others that could be added. And
I probably need to add a slide. Every year or so, Fort Polk in Louisiana is a big training area. And the 101st Air Mobile, they'll come train there, and once a year they'll put all their stuff on barges. They'll come in on barge to the port of Alexandria, offload, and actually do a tactical maneuver like they're at a port in Europe to their Fort Polk, which would be their combat area. So the red is being used for national defense training. And yes, I mean, that's another thing to look at. Units that are training along, are there any units, are there any training sites that like they're looking at National Guard and Reserve units coming down the Mississippi to train at Fort Polk by barge. Because they have to be able to train in different ways. And they save millions of dollars by water, because by train, not only does it's faster to get here, but lots of times they get batteries stolen, windshields broken, while they're sitting in yards, so on their way down. So they like moving by water. They save a lot of money, but and it is a national defense benefit. So yeah, that's everything we got to look at.
Well, look at Mexican, the repair people there.
Oh, they had a big shipment. I don't know if it came from New Orleans or Houston, of equipment from Iraq or Afghanistan. They came to the port of Cattle-Bossier. They were pretty well dead, so they offloaded them onto trucks and trucked them to the depot from the port of Cattle-Bossier. So yeah, there is a national defense value, and we got to identify those. It'd be great. Yeah.
I have a repeated statement that I would like to have confirmed, because it may have misunderstood, but I understand that they're building an offshore port in Louisiana for the mega ship, because we don't have any ports within the Gulf Coast area that will support the mega ships without more money than this. So is that true?
I've seen the plans where they would offload containers. Basically, it's for containers. And they'd sit out there in the Gulf, the barges would come up, and they'd put containers on the barges, and then they'd come inland on this inland waterway system. I've not seen that it's actually going to happen, but I've seen plans for it. Again, the inland waterway system, I mean, they're going to have to be willing to step up and do it. And I think with the reduction of coal shipments, there's a lot of reduction out of Kentucky and all that area, the Ohio River, on coal shipments, because we're not using coal as much, they're going to natural gas, that they may say, okay, we need something else to move, and it may be containers. So it's just going to have to be a industry mindset to accept doing container on barge. But if we can show the value here, because container on barge can happen, so it's a doable thing. So if we can find at the Dallas-Fort Worth area a distribution center that says I get thousands of containers from New Orleans or from Houston, we can calculate, well, can we put all those on barges for a Target or somebody that has a distribution center? And then what's the value, what's the savings if we do it by barge versus truck or rail? So that's the sort of thing we've got to look at.
There is at the port of Baton Rouge every day a huge load of wood material, pelletized wood material that is taken to England where 1/6 of their power production is from wood waste in the United States. Well, wood waste is, you can't feasibly truck it. So we had the aspect of being able to, we have a lot of wood waste and potential for wood waste in this area, in Oklahoma, Texas. We loaded on barges and feasibly, sent down to that place, Baton Rouge, where they buy it, in pelletized.
You don't know how many wood pellets is a big thing.
Yes,
It was a big thing in Europe to burn wood pellets.
that's what they do.
And they were actually done, because Louisiana's full of, scrap, would be perfect. They'd come this close to putting in a facility, and then the market would go and say, oh, we're not doing it. You don't know how close. We were just hoping for a wood pellet facility to ship overseas.
That's exactly what.
But maybe that could work up here. Maybe people up here have this resource or the supply, the buyers somewhere that it would work.
Well, we certainly have the shreddings and sawdust, which is considered waste, except for the power plant over in Bright City, which burns it. But it's not even economically feasible to ship a truckload of that from Lamar County over to Choctaw County, because there's no, it just costs too much for a load of sawdust to be even driven. You can pay your shipping between here and the mill, and that's all. Nobody wants to do it that way. Anyway, that could be a barge can handle a whole lot of sawdust and all that. Whereas you couldn't possibly haul it by truck and make any money.
Right.
Yes, is there a way that we can access this PowerPoint after the meeting?
Yes, it'll be on my website. They're going to send it to me, and then you're going to put it on YouTube.
Okay, also another question I have is when we were speaking of how Bossier City's water is 100% dependent on the Red River. So is there plans for our area to switch to having the water supply, the city water supply that come from the Red River?
It could, but you want to have, right now, the river gets too low, you get too much silt and sand in it. If you try to do it because of the time of the year, it's summer, there wouldn't be enough water to do it. So once we had a lock dam and the river stayed constant, a pool, yes, we could definitely do it.
The water is very salty.
Bossier hasn't had a problem. Now, the thing is, yes, it's very salty, Lake Texoma, and we've got projects, we're working on that. But once you get below Lake Texoma, you've got Hugo, you've got a lot of fresh water. And what we found is when you get to Arkansas, they're irrigating directly from the red, and we get enough rain that it leaches out the fluorides. But they are monitoring it, but Bossier has very little treatment at that. So yeah, you'd have to see where you are on the river, but it shouldn't be a problem at Arkansas or this part of the river.
So how is it going to affect the rivers that have been connected to the Red River in the area? So you have like the Comanche River, the Pine Creek River, like there's rivers that are connecting.
Right.
So what is the effect is it going to have on other rivers?
It will, when they determine the pool, what it's going to be, number one, they're going to permanently inundate land. That'll be permanently underwater. They will buy those people out. Because you're going to hurt.
The farms that are on the river?
Well, it depends on what the river level is. We don't know how far it's going to spread. Okay, so, it's all going to determine on the end. We haven't looked at that on what would be the elevation of the pool. Yes, there's going to, if we do the project and you come up with there's going to, some farmlands will probably be inundated. And they would have to be negotiated and bought out. And it would back up some of the tributaries. But again, they would look at what would the elevation be on those rivers and how would it impact them. And they would either bank stabilization or they would give folks, buy them out or talk, determine how to compensate for any damage.
So what about the contamination? I mean, has that been talked about, the contamination within the water and the soil? Because a lot of the property along Red River has gas, oil in it. So how is that going to affect?
I mean, we'd have, again, that's all going to be considered. We can't change the quality of the water, make it worse. So if we were to go up and they were saying you inundated oil wells, you'd have to cap them or you'd have to put them out of condition because you can't, there's no way we would allow contamination in the river. Never let that happen. That's part of the environmental impact that would all be calculated. They say, here's what the river's going to look like. What are the contaminating impacts? And they have to decide, here's how we're going to fix it.
Insofar as the taking of land is concerned, that would have to be done in connection with creation of the pools or assignment of a disciplined water courseway. There's another provision of the law that's quite beneficial to the property owner, and that's called condemnation exchange. And there are liberal rules under condemnation exchange in the time limits for reinvestment of the funds that are obtained by condemnation exchange. It has to be similar in purpose and use. So if it's a farm, it'd have to be a farm. If it's timberland, it would have to be timberland. But that is there for the protection of the property owner, and it's already part of law now. You have two different provisions of that, condemnation exchange, and the other one is called Section 1031, like-kind exchange. You would be eligible for both, but most beneficial to the property owner out there would probably be condemnation exchange because it has a longer time limit for identification of the substitute property for the relinquished property. And that will probably also be accompanied by a recognition of gain. And with that, you not only have condemnation exchange, but you also have in the 2017 Tax Reform Act something called opportunity zones, where if a property is bought with proceeds that would have gone for capital gains and is held for a certain time period, then the capital gains tax is forgiven. So there are some bright lights in the window there. And it's not something that is just a foregone conclusion that it's a negative result.
In Louisiana, nobody just had their land taken. They did not do that. We would not do that. Like you hear of eminent domain, we're going to take somebody's, that did not happen in Louisiana. And it wouldn't happen on these projects.
Where are these built, the vast majority of it? As a matter of fact, where are we?
No, Texas Industries does a lot of them.
Yeah, Trinity. There are pretty much along the Gulf Coast. There's some, and up St. Louis, along the Mississippi. There's quite a few. There's some
Along
small
major
ones.
waterways where they're being built. If you look at about, I'm going to say 75 years ago, look at the American population, where they are today. 2/3 of the population, if you draw a line from the Canadian border, Brownsville, Texas, live east of that line. Most of our transportation issues were coming east to west. Now that's completely turned around. The majority of what we're importing comes out of Mexico or it comes out of the Pacific Rim, Asian nations. We got 2 ports on the west coast of the United States that are deep enough to take those major transports, those huge containers. But they widened the Panama Canal to be able to handle those. If you've got 2 ports, that's Seattle and down in Los Angeles area, they get tied up and have been tied up on more than one occasion to where the crane operators in the major ports go on strike. And these ships are just lined up out there. It happened so many times that now Mexico has developed ports deep enough to take it, ship them from there up by rail into the U.S. Majority of that is going to go east. That's why Houston becomes important. That's why New Orleans became important. That's why Savannah just did a whole change in their port structure all the way up the East Coast to get these container ships to drop things off, because it's easier to ship that way. You're sitting in the central part of the United States and you shortstop right here. That's how the inland port got started, literally. Chinese have poured money into Canada in order to get rail across, but they had to do the port to make it work. Taking containers, none of the tunnels that the trains were going through from Canada into Chicago, all those tunnels had to be raised because of double decking on the trains. They're getting to the central part of the United States as fast as they can that way. What we're talking about here is opening up, like Rich said, one of the last waterways that is developable enough, economically based, to get into that program. That puts this entire area of the Red River range into a much higher economic value than we've ever had. We don't want to be left out of it. Nobody along this river, from Texarkana to Denison, wants it to be lost. Louisiana has already proved that it works. We want that capability to come all the way across to where people literally ship into this area to go out, much less come in. So it's a win-win situation if we can get this done. Louisiana has already proved that it works. Arkansas is seeing the bright light. We're working very hard now with Texas and Oklahoma to get the kind of dollars it's going to take to finish this off. Your help in spreading this word as far as you can spread it, as rapidly as you can spread it, is going to do nothing but enhance our capabilities at that point, because we are looking primarily at public-private partnerships to go this route. We need voices. We need people who see the site, understand the situation, and what it can do for this central area of the United States with that water transportation. Most of what's going east with the channels, canals, river capability, we're right on the western edge of all that. We can make things a lot better.
Do you have a question?
I did. What legislators are involved? Senators, congressmen?
Well, because it's not a federal, they're not involved. So like in Arkansas, we're not dealing with federal funds. It's 100% Arkansas and Louisiana funds, because we can do what we want, hire who we want. We're just giving the Corps contributed some funds to monitor, but there are no, because, 10, 11 years ago, when they went to the no earmarks, basically, we haven't been able to get much of anything, to be honest, because the administration makes all the decisions. Congress can't say, give money for this study. They can't do that. So we've decided it's faster and we have more control if we do it ourselves. Now, we brief them and we keep them informed, but they're really not involved.
If you work for the federal government under any capacity, no matter what, you can't go directly to the Indian nations without going through Washington first. As individuals, we can go talk to anybody we want to over there and trying to explain what we are doing, why we're doing it, and how anyone can be part of it. We need them, no doubt about that. Because where we're talking about there, they own probably, 90% of the water frontage
On the Oklahoma
on the
side.
Oklahoma side.
It's within the sovereign territory of the Choctaw Indian Nation and the Chickasaw Indian Nation. In fact, if you look right across from Denison, the extreme southwest corner of the Choctaw Nation is pinched off. And that very literal southwest corner belongs to the Chickasaw Nation. Now, the good thing is they're like brothers in the way they work together. They work together quite amicably. And each tribe has over 20 successful businesses outside of casinos and hotels that everybody thinks.
Chickasaws have their own
Yeah,
business.
that's right.
Yeah.
And so do the Choctaws. Now, if they joint venture the Port of the Indian Nations across from Denison, fine. That's their business. If Hugo is done by the Choctaw Nation, fine. That's their business. And if the Port of Paris, Texas, done by someone else, that's fine too. The point is that what I think what I hear Rich and what I hear Bill saying is that what worked in 1980s and 1990s does not work anymore. We have to improvise new ways of getting things done because of the political realities that exist in Washington. And also the evolution of finance. Financing is much more sophisticated nowadays than it was back in those days. You now have possible 3 or 4 first lien notes on a property. You didn't used to have that, but you do now. And it's not altogether uncommon. So looking at a private-public partnership is not just possible, it's realistic. And you have all of these constituents that come into play along the way that you have to consider. And the Oxbow Wildlife Sanctuaries, I think, is one of the most creative ideas that's come along out of the last stretch of the Louisiana segment of this, in that you took what would have been abandoned and possibly filled in oxbows, and you turn them into a productive use for the environment, a friendly use for the environment.
So who is going to be on the boards that's going to determine what goes on and the future plans? Like, who governs all of this?
The Arkansas is the Arkansas River Commission, and some partners from Louisiana, since they're putting up some money along here. It's going to be the state of Arkansas. I mentioned OWRB DOE, Oklahoma Water Resource Board, Oklahoma Department of Transportation, the two Indian nations, and Texas, it's the Red River Authority of Texas, because they're the local sponsor for the study, and the Texas Department of Transportation. But everything done is going to have public meetings. Okay, none of this is going to get finalized without having public meetings up and down the river with input from the public, especially the feasibility study. I mean, everybody's going to have an opportunity to say, here's what's going to happen on your area. People are going to have the opportunity to comment. Do you have land on the river?
My family does. Yes, my family does.
Yeah, we had, like in Louisiana, some folks had to get blown out and that, and they were like, I was thrilled about it. Well, some folks found out that, wait a minute, I now have a set pool, and they put in recreation like RV parks and other recreation facilities on their own. Well, nothing has to be done public, a lot can be done private. As long as you own the land on the river, you can do it. You can put in a port, you can put in a recreation site, you can do whatever you want. And you'll just find that once you see what the river's going to look like, you may say, oh, I can put something here, business.
Okay, so usually the development of projects like this, like, is it like an 8-year plan or a 10-year plan? Like, usually, like, on average, what's the time span for our plans?
Once we do the feasibility study, we'll then have the construction plan on how long it takes to do each lock and dam in each section. That would be laid out on a time schedule, so people can see, okay, it's going to reach me by this year.
Okay, because I was looking at, far as like, you were talking about like the economic development. I know some places have like, what you call lakefront, like restaurants, and I know you said the last vast truck, like, is that all?
Okay, that's all private.
Okay,
That's going to be, all we're going to do is create the water, create the navigation system. But we don't own the land. Our organization, whoever does this is not going to own any of the land except around the locking dams. Everything else is private. Whoever owns it, whether it's cities, parishes, counties, individuals, it's up to them to do whatever they want with that land. No one's going to tell them, other than their zoning, what they can or can't do.
Rick, I would recommend, if you haven't seen how it looks in Louisiana yet, that you take a drive between Shreveport, Bossier, and Alexandria, Louisiana, up and down, which highway? Louisiana Highway 1. And you can see the levees and you can see the river.
Website, did you just put it?
Pardon me?
Your website, did you?
Yeah, I don't think so. I think the best way is to see it with your own eyeballs.
It's,
Go there and look at it and see it.
if you go to the Red River Waterway Commission, that's the Louisiana Commission, they may have charts and maps that you might be able to look at. I mean, all you see is a picture. So, I mean, you can at least go there, and if you had questions, they could probably tell, because they're the ones who are the local sponsors of the project. So they could probably give you an idea of how many what private development has happened along the river.
Richard, when we started, I did not notice two of the ladies that came in that I didn't announce. Mary Baker was over here to the right with Paris News and been making a lot of notes, and back to back is Maureen Hammond, is director of our Paris Economic Development Center. I appreciate both of them being here. Just that, I think there are going to be a lot of people that are going to see this later on, and questions are going to come up. So I want to make sure they get their names on the recording so they can call you too.
Yeah, call me, there's things I need to talk to, and you're the folks we gotta come to find out the benefits.
Industry.
Absolutely. And that's when we get our committee together, once they start the study, we'll brainstorm Obviously, Oklahoma will know, Texas will know, and we'll just go by towns and start calling chambers and whoever and say, we need help.
How many years did it take Arkansas to get to the feasibility study? Because we're just beginning here. How long did it take Arkansas to get to feasibility study?
Well, it took a long time because we depended 100% on the Corps of Engineers to do the work. And like I said, they're a great organization, but they don't live here. All they really did was mail out, like they'll get a list from the chamber, they'll mail out these surveys. Well, what company's gonna fill out a survey?
Once y'all took over though, how long has it been?
It took, we got the $1 million to do the benefits 2 years ago.
Okay.
So it takes about 2 years to do this benefit analysis. We said it's over at 1.0. Hopefully the state this year will give us the money and we'll start the feasibility study this year.
Okay,
So-
and that could take 3 years?
3 years.
3 years. Okay, so where are we in this process?
If this is good, it'll be 2 years.
Okay, but
Once we started, this is 21, 23, we should have a report.
okay, now take the Texarkana to Denison.
Right. Okay, so we're starting now to do the economic evaluation this year. So 23, we should have the results.
Okay.
At that point, assuming like, it's going to be good. If we get $3 million from the states and everybody, we can start the feasibility study, which is 3 years. That could be done in 2026, 27. Say 27, but you're going to have to. And after you do the feasibility study, you're ready to make it happen.
So we're not talking about 20 years
No.
if everything goes fine.
If it goes,
It's not
right.
quite like building a reservoir.
Right. But that's, I'm going to tell you, that's because we're going to do it ourselves.
Yeah.
They started navigation on the Red River in Louisiana in 1925, the first group cut together. The last lock of that. See, because the other issue is if you wait for the government, we had to build 5 lock dams. We had to wait for them to appropriate funds each year. So you do a little bit, a little bit, a little bit. So, but we're going to get all the money and try to do each one in 2 years.
That's the question I'm going to get asked is, how long do they think this is going to take? You know?
Well, if these studies come out positive, there's no reason we can't keep moving.
Thank you.
Rich, the reason I was asking people to take a drive from Alexandria, Louisiana to Shreveport, see the levees, see how the river looks and everything, look up at the screen. Look up at the screen. On the right is the way the river looks now. On the left is the way the river would look then, after completion. And it's a vast difference. Vast difference. You have levees, you have bank revetments, you have all kinds of improvements. And it actually makes the land more valuable for people that own land along the river. More useful.
So who's gonna fund the studies, like a feasibility study and who finances these studies?
Well, if we do ourselves, we're going to look at the states, Oklahoma, Texas, and the Indian nations.
So they're done through taxes, donations, or the actual?
Donations. That's what we did in Arkansas. Arkansas, we're getting half the money from the state of Arkansas. Their governor's giving the money. And then in Louisiana, we're getting it from 2 levee districts, 2 parishes, and the Red River Waterway Commission, and the 2 cities, because they want it. So they're willing to put up a share of the money to make it happen.
That area wants to do,
Right.
raise the fund.
Right. The big, I mean, we're really not looking at the states. It's really the state, for the benefit of the states. I'm not going to see us going after cities and all that, I just think that's do, you just can't get it done. States, needs to be the states willing to make it happen.
So they're gonna fund it through the study or the actual building, construction, that it's all gonna be the same.
Well, maybe the construction, we said could be bonding, could be, different ways, but I don't see raising taxes along the river to make it happen. Raise enough taxes.
Any other questions or comments anybody have?
I've got several pretty substantial industries in McCurtain County. So I've got several pretty substantial industries in McCurtain County. IPs, Cooper, Domino's, and Pacific, Warehouser as its numbers all know, not a bill.
Okay, I'll tell you, I'm just gonna tell you this, because this would happen in Louisiana. We have IP and all those in Louisiana. They justify the project because there were benefits. They don't use the water, never used it, because the rail rates came down. The rail rate comes down, why would you change the way you do business? You're getting the value. That's what we try to tell people. It's not how many tons you move on the river, it's what's the impact to the industries. Did you get $2 a ton benefit? That's the benefit, not that it moved on the water. So yeah, all the timber industries, they're not using it because they negotiate. Well, if you don't want to come down, we'll go water. You got leverage on the rail. When you have the waterway, you're stuck, right? You're stuck with what they want to do. So as we try to tell people, the big value is the leverage on transportation costs.
I'd like to see more development down there closer to the river. Because right now, I'm sure everyone in this room knows about Hochtown, all the cabins, and I don't know if you get a lot of Dallas traffic. There, weekends just from cabins, it's blowing up there. I mean, but we're not talking little cabins, we're talking $500,000 cabins. I mean, for real. It's, so I kind of like to see that spread out a bit, because Robo School District is going to be a ton of money off that door, just like the cabins, which is great. I just see it spread out a little bit when you develop something down around the river.
Any other questions? Well, I'm available. If you have my info, I'd be glad to talk to anybody or answer questions. And I know there's going to be a lot of folks that are going to be very skeptical, but that's why we're going to have public meetings. We're going to have them in Arkansas first, so I encourage you, if you're close enough, when you hear about public meetings in Arkansas, come to those and see what's happening there, because that's what's going to happen around here. So, oh yeah, we'll have one for sure, more than one. Especially when we do the EIS, there'll be a bunch of public meetings. Thank you.
We thank you, we thank Bill and John and Brendan's wife and everyone that attended. It was, get the facts out that I'm excited about. And Bill and I kind of exchanged some information about our age and our good whiskey. We want to age well and we want to see this project underway and built. Before we get used up.
I'd love to be able to be taken up through those locks.
Thank you, everybody.
Bill Blaze locking me.
Yeah. Yeah.
That was fantastic. Thank you so much. Did you get Will time?